So I would now like to invite our audience, it's your turn, to ask questions of our speakers. And in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to direct your questions to one specific speaker. And as you may have to leave, you do have to leave, you're going to be, Earthrin's going to be replaced with her Deputy Executive Director, Amir Abdullah. So if you could come to the stage, and thank you very much for being with us. So I would ask that if you have questions for Minister Muluk on her comments on Indonesia, we can take a few questions there. So please just raise your hand if you have a specific question for the Minister.
No question. Thank you.
Okay, we can come back. If you're formulating your questions, we can come back to the Minister. Mrs. Michelle, who spoke very passionately about women's and children's nutrition. You have a question for Mrs. Michelle. We have a very quiet audience.
Yes.
We have a question. If you could just state who you are and the organisation you're from before you ask.
Thank you. I'm Michael Anderson from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. And actually, you said nutrition is the outcome of all of these sectors happening effectively and fulfilling purpose, which your foundation is endorsing. My question is, if it's everything at once and it's all interconnected, what is it we track? And with your foundation, your own work, are you making choices about which things to track to achieve these nutritional outcomes? Or is it trying to capture everything at once?
At this stage, actually, our work has been to address the highest level of governments to make them understand that they have to bring nutrition to the center of development. It sounds simple, everybody writes about it, but in practice, to have a president or a prime minister to bring together the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Health, of Education, of Industry, of Commerce, Community Development, Gender, etc., and say, this is an agenda in which I want clarity in every ministry that you have the budget there, you have the institutional capacity, and you go down, as Joy was quite rightly stating, that it will end at the plate of every single child and every single mother. That's when it's going to make an impact. And we are very far from getting there. So if you ask me what we are tracking, first is really to get them, the leadership of the countries we are working with, to put it at the center. The second thing which we are also concerned with is it's not only an issue of putting it at the center, it's how do you transform this into a process where the head of state himself, the prime minister, brings this to his responsibility. Because what happens is, when it's in the Minister of Agriculture or in the Minister of Health, no minister will have the authority to track what everyone else is doing. So it has to be put at the highest level in the office, either of the president or the prime minister. And this doesn't seem to be very complicated, but in practice it is. So as we speak, this is what we're trying to do. The second work we are doing is, what do we track? How many community-based organizations are really very clear about the huge importance of nutritious food? Many times they do produce food. It's not that it's not available, but it has to be prepared in a way it is nutritious for the whole family, and particularly for the social groups we are concerned with. And you find many times that it is not an issue of availability, it's the issue of eating habits. And how many of us, particularly civil society organizations who are working here, they can really, in conscience, say that we have been focusing on changing eating habits of communities, which means of families. So the work is still huge in where we are today and where we have to get. There's really a huge long way to go. So our foundation, and actually it's more than one foundation involved in this, our work is really with networks. What we do, we work with the networks who are in nutrition so that we expand the capacity of intervention. Many times we even, engage parliamentarians, not only heads of states and prime ministers, etc. Parliamentarians. Do they know how to read the budget and to look at the budget and to make sure that the budget has been clearly aligned with what is said as, this very good, statements, etc. So we have been working and training parliamentarians for them not only to read properly the budget, to understand what is required, but also to keep governments accountable. That's what we have been focusing on. But again, I want to say, when it comes to the community work, we are still at the very, very, very beginning.
Thank you. Let's continue this conversation on accountability. And I want to call for questions for Joy. There's no one who understands accountability or has worked harder than Joy on this issue. So if there are any other questions about accountability and how we're measuring nutrition performance.
Can I say something which is related to very, very previous experience which I have, particularly on not fragile states, but people in conflict and IDPs. I do not know whether today, and it is related to accountability, I'm not sure whether today it has changed. I have been many years back in different refugee camps. You find that the same kind of food which they send to this country is the same kind of food they send to that country. Yes, it is that the rice, the oil, the cooking oil and the sugar have been, they have been, how do you say, strengthened, fortified. They have been fortified. That has been happening. But the issue I'm raising is this. In a refugee camp or in IDP, you have maybe half of people will be adults, but most of them are children. Have we changed the way we package food to refugee camps, to IDPs, to meet the needs of children? I'm coming to my field of interest, to children. Because those days, you would find that the same food which goes for adults is the same food which is expected to be prepared in a different way, but it's exactly the same to be given to children. Why I'm saying it's an issue of accountability? It's not because people do not know that we have mostly children in refugee camps and IDPs. It's not because people do not know that women who are at the fertile age are there. But we don't take this into account when we package. I'm just talking of food. To package food to meet the needs of these people. And the international community knows this very well. They know this very well. But we're not changing. I'm raising this because, David, you are absolutely right. The percentage of people in poor settings is one, but those who are in fragile states, those who are in IDPs, those who are in refugees, if we don't change the concept of how to package food for those places, 10 years, 20 years down the line, we'll continue to say that in fragile states and situations, etc., people are much more stunted than in a normal situation. So when we talk of accountability, it means we begin here at the global level to change the way we do business, to change the way we look at our responsibilities if we are to target exactly the problems which we have identified already. So it comes, one, my sister there, my daughter, she was talking very passionate about the private sector, etc., etc. But I think really these SDGs now are bringing a huge responsibility of every single one of us. Go back and do the homework and say, if I am to achieve these MDGs, what do I have to change first? Second, what I am doing, which maybe I have to do a different way, but to do better. To do different, to do better, and to do more. But we can't believe that just because we have this very ambitious wording and because we have very good statements which are being made, we are going to, if we don't change as people, as organizations, as institutions, with a global family, we don't revisit what we have been failed in the past, I really have to say, we are going to be again making promises to the poor of the world, to women and children again, and 30 years come, 15 years come down, we will say, oh no, this percentage has not been achieved. And that's what I wanted to say. It has to do with me in terms of how accountable we all are about what we are saying and what we are promising.
Could I just,
Yes.
on behalf of your sister daughter,
daughter,
replaced by your son, I hope, Mama Michelle, I mean, to try and make David not feel so outnumbered, as he pointed out earlier. But no, I mean, I think your point is very good. When I began my career in 1990 in the World Food Programme, the situation that you described was there. A ration was a ration, and there was very, very little special foods for children. In fact, we used to provide a corn soya blend that actually didn't really meet the need of the children, and that was it. But things are very different today. I mean, there are nutritious foods provided for children. We've worked with a lot of private sector input to actually produce, foodstuffs that are packaged well. Mothers can provide them to infants so that they can eat them directly. I think we also, one of the things that we have done more of is recognize that, yes, you can provide, as you said, the fortified beans, oils, maize, or maize flour fortified, and bring them to areas. And there are situations where we need to bring that food, but there are many other situations where by injecting income into the community through either a cash program or an electronic voucher program to actually stimulate growth. The next step after that, which I think is crucially important, and recognizing the point that we made about food and the economy, is actually to make sure that the nutritious processed foods can be made in the communities. I mean, it was not many years ago, we had a situation in the Sahel where, because of the urgency, we had to actually fly a peanut-based, highly fortified, highly nutritious peanut-based product from France into the Sahel. I would almost guarantee that the peanuts in that product were probably grown in the Sahel, shipped to France, flown back. So, I mean, just imagine what we did, for climate change there and the come. So, but also for the economy. So I think that, we've got through some of the first steps. I think we now need to work even more to make sure that these can produce locally, so that then hopefully with the reduction of poverty, people will be able to buy these locally, but through social protection programs, we can actually make it that people can buy. And we've actually found that combination works. In Burkina Faso, we were actually providing an electronic voucher to mothers, but at the same time, because it wasn't available, providing them with this highly nutritious product for their infants. So things have changed a lot in the past 20 years, but that's not to say that we're there yet. There's a lot still to come.
So let's have questions for Joy or David. Yes, yes, you sir at the back.
Thanks so much. My name is William Chulka, coming from Zambia. Thank you so much for the discussion. I really followed, especially the aspect of accountability, which is close to myself, in the sense that we've reached at a point in nutrition sector where a lot of commitments are being made, and that when you try to look at what we are doing in relation to those commitments, I think we're not really doing that well. I agree with Mama there to say that we need to ensure that we create demand for nutrition among the community people. I think if we are to progress in terms of ensuring that everyone or all sector players do their part, I think let's have two forces, especially when it comes to advocacy. Let's have advocacy at the high level where you target the people that make the decisions, but also the community needs to be fully involved so that they are also asking certain questions. Like in Zambia, for example, the government is every year giving the food, the farmer input support program. And what normally happens is that the food support program is tailored to the maize, the corn. And the farmers are usually very happy to just get that. But at the end of the day, the maize that they grow doesn't give them all the nutrients that they need. So if the people would get to understand that they need more than the maize that they get, that will go a long way, and they would ask politicians. And we know that politics in Africa has and has a bearing in terms of how certain things are delivered. So if the people say, we shall not vote for you if you don't do this, so you realize that the politicians also begin to listen. So really we have to keep on talking about the problem of accountability with regard to nutrition. I agree with you again that the problem of malnutrition is an awareness issue. An awareness issue, the fact that sometimes you have people that have everything. In Zambia, you could have somebody with even 150 cattle, but they've never slaughtered any to eat because they've left them as a sign of wealth. So they need to understand that. But also, the politicians and the decision makers, they need to know, they need to be aware that the commitments that they're making, at the end of the day, they need to be seen to be doing something and implement those. So
Thank you.
Just comment on that.
Thank you, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
A question for David. Mike Penrose from Action Contre la Faim. Agree fully, absolutely agree fully on your focus on fragile states and the humanitarian needs in fragile states. But one of the biggest problems we have today is that when you're talking about a stable environment, you talk about 10-year funding windows, objectives that go forward for 10 years. The minute a state is classified as fragile, and as you said, falls into the humanitarian domain, we work on 6-month, 1-year funding windows. But the average amount of time that people remain displaced is, 15, 16 years now, or higher. The environments that we're talking about now, and I've been in this work for 20 years, are the same that I was working in around Rwanda and Somalia and South Sudan, etc. How do we then, as we go into the SDG objectives, gain that same political momentum to fund fragile states and problems in fragile states with the same temporal perspective that we view development problems? Because we're going in with 6 months and we're creating a program and then we're getting more money, and we're not... The problem with protocols, SAM and MAM, is part of the problem. But the reason we never object it is that most SAM treatment is viewed as a short problem. And so we get 6 months to go in and fix it. But it's the same children that we're seeing for years and years and years. How do we get the political will and momentum from the donors to cut this humanitarian development artificial divide and start looking at acute problems in complex and chronic contexts?
Look, great points. I mean, I want to make 3 points, but the best answer is that Mrs. Michel's speech that she's made just now needs to be filmed and sent to every world leader, because what she said 5 minutes ago encapsulated the point absolutely brilliantly with clarity and with passion. But other than Graça Machel being the tribune for this, I think 3 things are really very, very important in this. The first is that at the moment, fragile states is not a lexicon, is not a vocabulary that's recognized by some very significant international actors. Take the World Bank as an example. They're not able to work in Lebanon and Jordan because they're classified as middle-income countries, even though they're in the middle of a humanitarian emergency. So there are some, and to be fair, Jim Kim and the World Bank want to do something about this, but it hasn't yet been done. So the first thing is get your institutional alignment sorted out. Secondly, I think that the fact that in the 20 biggest humanitarian crises, I think in 2014, there was a $5.6 billion of humanitarian spend, but $28 billion of development spend in the same countries, but that they weren't being brought together, speaks to silos, and I'm sorry to say this in this audience, interests, bureaucracies, vested interests that have ways of doing things. We've got to be honest about this, that money is pouring down or sometimes trickling down different silos with, as you exactly rightly say, different modalities and different organizing principles. In the Central African Republic, actually, to be fair to the EU, I don't know if there's anyone here from the European Union, they've actually created a single pot of money, I'm not describing this as well as I could, that actually brings together the humanitarian development funding, which is actually what counts, and you can then establish the right sort of parameters, because as you say absolutely rightly, the word humanitarian conjures up a short-term emergency, whereas actually it can be a long-term emergency. The vocabulary as well as the institutions are wrong. Thirdly and finally, I want to come back to the point about targets and accountability. If there isn't a target that specifies that whichever institution you're in, you're going to be judged publicly and privately for whether or not you're delivering for people in conflict states, then it's not going to get the attention it deserves, because the old business adage that what you measure is what you manage is true. And it's true for the public bureaucracies, sorry to say this, as well as for the private sector. And I am really focused on this point, that if we're serious about implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, in the time between now or Friday and the World Humanitarian Summit next April, there's an overriding responsibility for those of us committed to the implementation of those goals in the conflict and fragile states to think, what are what I would call floor targets, including for nutrition, that we will use as the benchmarks for progress, and they will be applied across the institutional landscape. The best way to break bureaucratic silos is to have shared targets and to make sure there's public accountability for them. And I can't think of a better way of ensuring that there's real public pressure as well as private pressure, because if you can get the buy-in, then there's real progress. It was very, very important, this. Tony Lake made a speech to the Executive Committee of UNICEF 2 weeks ago, in which he said, look, we've got Sustainable Development Goals, and then 6 months later we've got a World Humanitarian Summit. And then we wonder why there's a development humanitarian divide. Now, good for Tony for saying that, because he's identifying the problem really clearly. And I think we've got to build on the kind of openness and insight that Tony was showing to really try and create some progress. And isn't it the case that Action contre la faim are working with us on this protocol on severe and moderate acute malnutrition? And yeah, so between the two of us, we've got to rally a broader coalition, because in truth, the problem that you've identified is built into this assumption: severe acute malnutrition is just a short-term thing. Well, there may be a short-term response, but if you go back to a community that's in the middle of conflict, you're going to end up going from moderate to a severe malnutrition before you can say Jack Robinson. So I'm glad you spoke as you did, and sorry to have taken longer in my answer, but I think those are some ways in which this can be addressed.
So on that note, actually, we're going to have to, you will get another chance towards the end of the program to make statements and also to ask more questions of our speakers. We hope that you can stay with us until the end of the program, but we're going to move now to actually the launch of the report. So if we can give a round of applause for our very distinguished panel.